Alright, welcome to another Lemon Amiga play guide and review. This time we'll be checking out Joan of Arc, Siege and the Sword, developed by Chip Software and published by Brøderbund in 1989. In this story, we follow the 100 Years' War, and on the 25th of October 1415, Agincourt, the archers of Henry V, managed to destroy all of the knights in a sunken marsh at Picard, and then the Armagnacs and the Burgundians and the partisans cheerfully massacred the enemies, and then famine took over for a few years and the soldiers of England plundered the land. And so we get to 1420, and by 1428 Charles VII, who is the son of Mad Charles VI, wanted to take over. In 1429 Joan of Arc set off from her place near Lorraine, and she had to get the king to Reims in order to get crowned. So Joan reaches Chinon at the end of February, and she's permitted to see the heir of the throne, and he grants her the ability to try to rescue Orleans, which is held by the British, and that's the first thing we need to capture in this game. It's 1429, and we have a very small army which can withstand a few battles, and at this early point in the game all we can do is to start the campaign. If we try anything else, that will simply waste time. So let's go on the offensive, and now we can choose the position that we are on the map by clicking on our flag, and hopefully that will then put up onto the screen our military units. And it's a bit convoluted, to say the least, at the beginning of the game, because this isn't absolutely intuitive. So let's try that again. We can click on displacement, and that will move our units from one place to another. So let's try that. We can now click on Joan of Arc, and yes, it's important to click on our campaign army, even though I think we can only control one campaign army in this game. That will then move, finally, our units into the region of Orleans, and Joan of Luxembourg is already waiting for us with her field army. We then get control of that battle in a battle scenario, and at this early point in the game it's essential to beat the field army in Orleans, and then you can attempt the siege of Orleans, which was definitely one of those things that happened in history. And you can see that our units are marked in red, and they will go down on the bar as we lose those units. And you can see the enemies are firing towards us, and we're actually shooting into our own guys at the moment, which isn't very helpful. And so let's try to shoot into that enemy. Finally, the battle is won, and we only just survived, and that was a very poor victory for us, but we did survive, and Joan of Luxembourg is now found in the prison, and that information, that small line of text, will come in handy a bit later on. For now, we've just won our first battle, and we've moved our very first army into Orleans, so we're going to have to capture that territory, I think. And I'm not sure whether you have to do that in the game. Maybe if you just go to Reims or Reims, then you'll be crown king, but I'm doing it by the book. So what can we do? Well, we need to go on to offensive now. We don't need to move anybody, and then that will give us a list of the castles or the objectives in that particular region. So yes, let's click on that, and it says Orleans is English, so let's click on that, and the army of Joan of Arc besieges Chartres. So this is a region, so now we move on to another battle scenario where we get to attack that castle. then get the opportunity to fight against the enemy, who will peer out of windows and will shoot arrows down upon us. And that is pretty much like a barbarian game, where if you hold down the fire button and pull to the left, he will swipe at the enemy, and if you push upwards, he will do a chop that goes down, and if you pull on the diagonals, he will do an arm swipe, which will chop off the arm of the enemy, and also diagonal top right, that will also chop the head off. So finally we get through the drawbridge section, and any of our remaining units will then pour through, and according to this there are millions of guys, but we don't have too many at this point. And now it moves on to the third scenario, which is taking the keep. We can pull left and right to jump between ladders, and we can also hold down the fire button and push upwards as well to put our shield on, and that will shield us against the boiling oil and the rocks which are being thrown down upon us by the enemy. And that isn't easy because we only have a limited number of guys, and we can only survive a number of skirmishes at the beginning of the game with our feeble starting army. So every time one of these guys gets killed, that will knock off maybe 10 or 100 guys from our army. See, very few of them have made it to the top of the keep, and that's maybe a random element. And now we've managed to take that castle, but there are two castles in this particular area, and I think that we're supposed to liberate both of them. Good news, sire, Chartres has been liberated. So in this game we take control of the king, even though we're not actually the king at this point. And now one of our castles is being besieged, and they're taking over our castle. And again, if the enemy take over our castle by taking the keep, then they will take that area back again. So I'm not quite sure what's happened there. Let's see what it says. Now you get to see that we are in yellow on the map, and yellow means that half of that territory has been taken. You can see the pink ones are the British, and the blue territories are the French. And this is a very CGA looking map that you can see at the moment, and that's basically because we're using the pink and the blue. So let's move on to our next scenario, and now we continue the battle with however many units that we've got left. And you can see that the red bars on the bottom continue from the last battle, and we have to be pretty impressive with the old guns in order to beat the enemy. And Jean VI of Brittany is now besieging another one of our territories. And so you will have to make do with sometimes very light attacks. You can see even after one or two attempts the enemy folds, and that is now destroyed. So that means that we get to keep that territory, and we'll have to keep an eye on the enemies attacking us on every turn. And we're still in May 1429. So what can we do? Well, we can try royal justice, but unfortunately we can't apply any royal acts until we become a royal in the country. And until that happens, then we can't do anything like collect taxes or ransom anybody. So we'll just have to continue, and every single time that we choose the wrong thing on the menu, that will advance us maybe another month, and then in that another month we'll get attacked again, and having been attacked again we'll have to stop the enemy from trying to get yet again another one of our territories. So you don't really want to make the wrong decisions on the map screen, otherwise you'll lose a turn and you'll have to defend. And sometimes that defending is successful and sometimes it isn't. And sometimes we can capture the enemy leader and ransom them a bit later on. So now we're in June, let's try again. And so this game plays some music every time you do something. So let's go on the offensive again, and hopefully this time we'll take Orléans. Let's click on that, and Orléans and Chartres. So let's click on the name so that it's highlighted this time. And finally, we're now besieging Orléans. We're doing it a few months late according to history, but we're now managing it with the very few last guys that we've got left in our army. At this point the enemy is tough and you'll definitely need to lay into these guys with all the skills that you can muster in order to get over this drawbridge. And it might surprise you to learn that I had to replay this game quite a number of times in order to beat this first scenario, and it's not always easy. Even though I may make it look easy in these play guides, it's certainly easy to mess it up. And if you do mess it up, unfortunately at this stage, that means it's game over. And after a final flare-up, we are defeated by the element of feeble Henry VI of Lancaster. That means the entire kingdom now is British. And so if you do get it right, and you do manage to capture that territory, then you do get a nice picture and you do get a triumphant welcome in Orléans, and it says triumphant entry into the city. And let's get on with capturing now the rest of the British territories. So after every single move you'll find the same music, and I'll be cutting that out hopefully for the rest of this review. You're supposed to get to Reims or Reims in that top corner, so all we can do now, hopefully, if we've got that territory, and well, still trying the royal justice, I'm afraid that's not going to work, and that means yet again we waste a turn. So now they're trying to take Orleans again, so that means that we have to defend that area. And you can see at the same time we're now being pressurised by the enemy, and this is at complete random, and sometimes you can't help but fall into these traps early in the game, and that means that completing the game and getting further in it is made all of the harder. In this case you can see that we've been challenged to a duel, so we get to select the weapon at the very beginning that we need to use, and we can use a sword or one of those spiky ball things, and I think that's called a mace. So you can use one of 3 items, and then whilst you're on the sword you can jab and swing with that and aim at the enemy. You can see the enemy is the red guy and I'm the blue guy. I'm the one taking all the punishment, and I'm absolutely not sure at all how to play this game as far as this scenario goes, and I've never worked it out. According to the long plays, you're supposed to charge at the enemy and swipe at the last minute, and the enemy can do that no problem, but unfortunately we are dead. So that leads to, well, not the end of the game. It means that the enemy can now surround us and finish us off in the last battle. when the enemy overrun us, then there is no other option. We can fight to the last man, which is what we're doing at the moment. And you can see that the time of year also has a bearing on effects. We're in May, so it's now springtime, and you can see different landscapes appearing as we do battles in the game, depending perhaps also on the region. And the army of Joan of Arc's now been crushed, so hopefully we're now attacking Reims, or Reims, however you want to pronounce that. And if you do manage to capture the keep in Reims, then that means finally that the king gets crowned, and it's a huge epic coronation as finally we get control of the game. And Regent King Charles VII has now taken control of the last bit of France, which is French, and that means from now on in, finally, having made it this far, we get to rule France, and that means we get to rule over that kingdom. So you can see two areas are now in yellow, and we're now the king, so a king icon appears on the map. So finally, we can do the royal justice. And what does this mean? Well, we don't have any cash at the moment, and even though there are a number of ways to get cash in the game, taxing peasants is definitely one of the lowest, and definitely isn't very economical. So what we're hoping to do is to ransom somebody off, and having ransomed somebody off, hopefully we can do that. So let's check out the diplomacy. We can do diplomacy, and we can ask for an alliance and liberation and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, you can't go back. If you select the wrong menu item, you're just going to have to select something, and if that doesn't work, then unfortunately you've just wasted your turn. And in this diplomacy one, which I never use, basically you can select who you want in your diplomats of a number of people who are allies to us, and you can see politics is strong, leadership is strong, so you can select your diplomats, and so we can negotiate a good term in Paris. Unfortunately, that's not much good to us at the moment, and that's a wasted opportunity because I couldn't find the option to ransom anybody off, but I should find that on the next turn. And in response to the request, they agree a peace treaty for 2 years. So that means that Paris won't get invaded for 2 years. And so when we move on to another defence scenario, we've just wasted our turn. So that means we're going to have to defend another castle. We can also choose to have somebody beheaded, and you can choose one character to have them beheaded. And that means that you'll lose any income that you will get from ransoming these people, so there's no point really doing that. But you can do that in this game. So at the moment we've condemned the Count of Suffolk to be beheaded, and that means that we'll get another cutscene with that happening. So there is blood and gore in this game, and unfortunately we didn't raise any cash, so the troops have deserted. You can see Royal Treasury 0 in the bottom corner. So what we're going to do now is we can negotiate the liberation. So what can we do? We can select the Count of Suffolk. So choose ransom money. So let's choose £1 million to liberate that guy, and we can choose 2 ambassadors. So let's choose somebody who's got strong politics so that we can negotiate that, and let's see the outcome of that. So we hope to liberate the Count of Suffolk for the sum of £1 million, and we send over a couple of diplomats to see if that has any effect whatsoever. And it's great to see these hand mode images in this game presented in high colour, and in response we accept the liberation and we get £1 million, and the army of Flagstaff unfortunately has now besieged Orleans again. So they're still trying to take us down, and so we'll have to every other turn defend against these things. So Captain Flagstaff has successfully escaped, unfortunately. That means that we can't ransom him off. But now on our next turn, we've now got £1 million, according to that, in the treasury, which is a fantastic start, which means we can now build up our armies. So let's have a look at the royal treasury now that we have actually got some money. So we can have tithes, and we can tithe the people, and we can tithe regions individually, and that means that we'll get a bit more money. But again, taxing the citizens isn't really great, and there is also a tax that we can put on people, a wood tax, and that I think can only be instigated in one of the seasons. It's perhaps April, so we can only do that once a year. So taxing people really does give us a feeble amount of cash, and definitely ransoming, or liberating as it calls it in this game, people in our dungeon is definitely the best way to go. So yet again they're trying to take Orleans, they're not managing it, and Jean IV can be found in prison. So yet again we've captured that woman, and it would be great to ransom her off to the enemy so we can get even more money. So what are we doing at the moment? It's June 1429. We've now got the cash. So what can we do with this convoluted menu system? We can start the campaign and displace people. So let's move them. And I don't really want to take on this entire territory. I think it's like Defender of the Crown. I think we have to move them back to the start again in order to build up the army again. And you can see this precious little army that we've got left from all these battles that we've had to do. So even at this stage, before we can buy any more units, we've still got to defend and withstand the final battle. So keeping those guys at arm's length by using wisely our units to lob projectiles at them, we've now succeeded in that battle, and that means the enemy's forces in the field will be weaker every time that we do win a battle. So we're now hoping to displace those guys again and hopefully get those back to the start again, which is the castle that you can see, which is around the Chinon region, and that's where we start the army. It besieges Clermont. So Jean of Luxembourg, again the thorn in our side. So what can we do? If we hold down the fire button and pull downwards, that will release boiling oil down, which can get rid of at least 2 or 3 guys in one go. Or if we hold down the fire button and push upwards, that will put a rock on the heads and we can lob rocks down upon them. We can also load and save at any point, and this being the WHD load version, it's still asking us to format a disk, but it would be a good idea to save at this point. So now we can raise the army. Finally, we've reached the castle, so we can raise the army. That just means that we can create an army or modify an army. I'm not sure if we can create multiple armies. I'm going to attempt to do this with one army in the field, and that's just like Defender of the Crown. So what can we do from here? We can click on the plus and the minus to increase from the number available in, and put those into our army. You can see the troops that we have. We're down to our last 1,500 troops, and bombards, of course, are the feeble cannons. I'm not sure what validation does. I think that just means put that into the army. But we can buy things from here, and at this point I'd definitely recommend spending all our cash on the army. So we've campaigned and we've moved through time. We're now July 1429. So using our fortified army now, I'd definitely recommend spending more cash than we have done at the moment on fortifying that. Hopefully we can capture the rest of Orleans now by capturing those territories. And good news, Caen is liberated. So we've now got Caen. So let's see what that is. That's more of the pink area. And you can see north of the territory. We're now moving into that. And so it doesn't take long at the very start of the game to get a big army together and start knocking down the English. So you can see state of war. All these places have now been taken. I've taken Rouen, which is pretty true to history as well, because that's the next place that they captured after Reims. And following history, we're trying to push the British back. So it's paramount to get the cash in the bank and to get a nice big army together and to select which of the territories that you want to invade. And if you let the British run rampant, they will attack us. So that's why we're going north at the moment, to try to knock the wind out of their sails, so that we can then go south and take over the rest of France and then clean them up after all of that. And in this part of history, of course, the British had Gascony and quite a lot of places in France, so we're going to have to take them out one at a time. I'm not sure the effect of arrows, but if we are hit by a sword, that will knock us back, and we can take maybe 10 knockbacks, and then that's the guy over. So it really is paramount that you parry these attacks so that you defend them, and then having defended them, you can go in for a swipe. So it's the art of parrying and hearing for that, and then you can swipe. And it's whatever means is available. You can chop their heads off or chop their arms off, but whatever it is, hopefully you can get a swipe on them. And sometimes these sieges can last forever. And once the last guy dies, then unfortunately that's it. We didn't repair the army enough in order to siege this castle. So that means that our units have now been destroyed. So that means that the enemy gets to face us again in battle on the battlefield, and Joan of Arc can be found in prison. So it looks like we got destroyed anyway. So that's definitely not what you want to do. And so this is continuing. We have, it looks like, captured some regions, but it doesn't look like that we have a field army because that's been captured. So let's raise up another army. Let's create an army from scratch. Joan of Arc has been captured, and she was actually captured a bit later on. So that means that we're slightly out of history, and we can even give a commander to the army. And so let's have this guy. His politics is weak, but his leadership and his commanding ability is at the top. So now that we've lost our skirmish army, we've lost Joan of Arc, we'll now hopefully spend a lot more money. And you might notice that the monthly payment is also 100,000. And so every month we'll have to pay them that money. So it's paramount to look at Normandy. We only need to take one more place in Normandy, and we only need to take one place here. So it's, what do we do at the moment? Everything's looking okay. And so Royal Treasury. So we're trying to get even more money. And if we waste taxes, unfortunately we can't do that, because we'll need to do that in September, that is. We can only do that in September. That's the heath tax. That's when we charge people for digging up heath and burning heathland in order to get fuel. So we can tax that only in September, and we're in August now. So we've wasted a turn. So what are we going to do? We're going to tithe them instead. And so it's best to tithe the biggest territory, and it looks like these guys are already in revolt. That's not what we want to see. And as soon as you tithe somebody, it will show that they're in revolt. So we can see the weather on this particular map, and it will also show which ones are in revolt, and all of them, apart from the one that we're at the moment, is in revolt. So what can we do? Well, we can put our campaign army in there and show our muscle, and hopefully we can calm the revolt down by force of arms. Or we can grace people, or we can arrest people, or we can execute people. So let's try arresting people, and well, we can arrest somebody. I'm not quite sure. Joan of Arc is already being arrested, resides in the Tower of London according to that, and so resides in the King's Court, so we can arrest somebody in the King's Court if we really want to do that. And so choose your reason. Witchcraft, fleeing from the enemy. So we've now arrested a guy from our own court. He's heading for trial, and he's been convicted, unfortunately, of witchcraft. So we can do that in this game. I didn't want to do that, so we really need to be ransoming people off. You can see our treasury's gone down almost by half already. We haven't really done much in this game. So what do we decide to do? It's better if we execute the enemy and execute hostages or execute people in the province. So we can now select the province from the map that we want to start executing people, and it's better if we do that in the order that we taxed them. So we tax these guys first of all. So now let's condemn the rebels in that territory to death, and that means that we'll get another image. And that shows the people hanging from trees, and that's definitely a sight that you'll get familiar with in the game. Moving back now, all we can do is execute and put execution orders on all of these provinces, and hopefully the more that we execute those rebels, the less likely they will be in rebellion, and if they are in rebellion we can't tax them, and so unfortunately we've missed the Heath tax by a month because we were sorting out the rebellions, and I'm not sure if you can tax those people that are in rebellion. So we're now in November 1429, and so what can we do? We're still trying to tithe people, but trying to get that money is a feeble objective, as we've already seen already. We're now trying to tithe the people that we've just executed, and guess what that will do? That will mean that they rebel again. So it means we'll need to go in and execute them again. So it's best if you can execute people at the start of the game to get all your territories on your side before you go forward with the campaign army. And so that's what we're doing at the moment, and that's pretty difficult when the money's running out, but we're going to move to a different region now, and we do have a few more regions to go. So the 100 Years' War really began around 1066 when the French invaded Britain at the Battle of Hastings, and everybody in Britain then spoke French. So it became kind of a French kingdom. And then in 1328 Charles IV died, and that meant that Edward III became the acting king of France, but that was unfortunately rejected. So from then on in we had quarrels with the French, and that took hold in 1346 with the Battle of Crécy, and 1356 with the Battle of Poitiers, in which the British took the French King John and captured him, and that's really when things are really taking off, 1346. And so by 1428, the Battle of Orleans, when the British are trying to finish off the 100 Years' War, and then we get to 1429 in the spring. Joan of Arc shows up, and in July they get Reims, and by the following May they have a siege of Compiègne, and that's when Joan of Arc is captured, unfortunately, and she's captured and sent by the Burgundians, and they hand her over to the British. And unfortunately in 1431 the British then burn her at the stake. So that's the 100 Years' War, and that lasted up to 1450 with the Battle of Castillon. And so after that the French and the British still had loads of skirmishes, and we had a second 100 Years' War from 1714 to 1815, and that's yet again skirmishes with the French. So this being the first 100 Years' War, we haven't seen too many games, and the only other 100 Years' War game on the Amiga is Castles 2 that we've seen already. So you can see pittance now in our treasury. We're down to our last 100,000, and we really at this point need to ransom somebody off. So royal justice. So what do we want to do? Execute. Well, we're still executing people at the moment. That's not really great because we don't really want to go into the red, and you can see everybody around us is still in rebellion. So these are the things that you have to deal with. We can't just get onto the battles in this game, and if we tax people heavily, then unfortunately we'll have to deal with that. So the coder of this game was Carlo Chip Perconti, and Carlo Chip Perconti is perhaps Italian or French, and he founded Chip Software, and this is definitely Chip Software, and he also created Pharaoh, which is a similar type of game with loads of sub-games in it. He released that through the Electronic Arts label in 1989. So after that he also converted Titus the Fox onto the Amiga, and also Prehistoric. So also Journey to the Centre of the Earth as well, which is another one of those games with arcadey sequences built into those. So if you like arcadey sequences, definitely check out Pharaoh and Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Carlo Chip Perconti. Still looking at this game, we're still running out of cash, and so we're still trying to tithe people, and sometimes you can tithe people and get away with it if it's a friendly territory, and definitely if you tithe in the place with the castle in it, and that's Chinon, then that means hopefully that we can get some more cash, but that only just gives us maybe 100,000, or well, even less in this case, 23,000. So it really wasn't worth doing that. And if it's a small area, then obviously you're only going to get a small amount of cash. And we're in August, so we're still going to have to wait another month before we can get the Heath tax. And by this point you really should have ransomed off everybody who is in your area, and that means that you've got loads of money coming in. And so looking at the map, it looks like that everybody's settled down. Let's see if we can raise another army, and we can't raise much of an army at this point with this amount of funding. And so let's check it out. Everything's still French. We're clicking on, and we're clicking on things, and again this convoluted menu system means unless you know exactly what you are doing, then you might be lost at any given stage, and I'm not actually sure what I'm supposed to be doing at the moment. Some of these are in prison, some of these reside in the King's Court, and you can see some of them have got strengths and weaknesses. So Richmond, again, he's in the Tower of London, he's been captured. So it doesn't look like that we can use him. So let's choose anybody, and let's see. Okay, it's selected this one, and so it looks like he's now the head of the army. So let's get some troops together and let's hopefully build up a skirmish party so that we can actually get enough to continue with the game. So it's a tough choice because we don't have that much money and the monthly payment is only going to be just enough. And again, if you haven't ransomed somebody off, then these are the kinds of things that perhaps you'll have to cope with. And so we're moving the campaign army, we've chosen where that starts, and so we're moving that into another region. That means that we spend another month, and that means that we get to, well, we're not attacked by the field army and we're not attacked by anybody else trying to capture our territories. It looks like the English have settled down at this point, so it means that we get another turn. So what are we going to do now with our feeble army? Don't tell me that we're going to tithe people again, because that's the last thing that we need to do, because it might give us some more revolts. So now we're sieging Le Mans. And so if we're sieging a castle, then we don't really need much of a field army. We just need enough troops to take that castle, and you can see not many people are in there from the British, and that means that we should have an easier time of it, even though we've got a feeble army. And look at that, one more guy, that's all we had. One guy is enough to finish us off, and that means, unfortunately, our leader will be found in prison, and the army of the Duke of Warwick now besieges La Rochelle. So you've only got a limited amount of projectiles that you can throw at the enemy, and so we've only got a number of rocks and a number of boiling oil as well. So you have to be conservative with those if you're defending the territory, and unfortunately Warwick has managed to escape. At this point in the game, it looks like we are struggling. We've reached September, and so let's check it out. There are now 2 territories that are rebelling, and so what do we decide to do? In September we can attack somebody else, or we can ransom somebody else, or we can tithe people with that special Heath tithe tax. Fortunately, we're going to execute people in revolt again, so yet again this is what not to do, and hopefully on the next turn we're going to tithe somebody, but that's not an amazing amount. So Joan of Luxembourg hands Joan over to the English for £10,000. So Joan of Luxembourg, who's managed to capture Joan of Arc, and I'm not sure if it was the Burgundians originally who did that according to the actual story. So yet again we've managed to miss the opportunity to tax the population, and finally everybody's yet again stopped revolting. So what can we do? We've got a feeble army, so royal justice, we can, well, it looks like we're struggling to get the money, and this is what can happen in the game. If we're tithing people just enough to get through to the next month, and then they rebel again, and then we tithe them again, and then they rebel again, we can get into a continuous loop of tithing people, and that isn't particularly what you want in the game, and it can be pretty boring when you're in that loop. And so that's kind of a locked out loop that we'll need to get around in the game, as well as defending all our territories. And now the Duke of Bedford can be found in prison. And all those guys will have different amounts that we can get for those. Sometimes we can get millions of pounds if we liberate those guys, and sometimes not. and sometimes it's definitely worth choosing somebody to liberate that's worth a lot of money. So let's finally do that. We've got the Duke of Bedford here. Everything strong is in the royal prison, so that means he's worth a fortune. So let's select him. Let's now select our ransom. Let's select 2 million for this, and let's negotiate in Paris because it's a nice easy place to negotiate. And again, politicians are needed, so it's sometimes a good idea to save the best politicians for the guys who are worth the most money, and that means that you can guarantee that income, because if you sell guys with weak politicians, sometimes that won't work. So we really should have gone for 4 million at this point, and that would have written the ticket to the end of the game. I'm not sure if anybody's worth 4 million. The ones that I've tried to liberate for 4 million, I didn't actually manage it. So we're going for 2 million in this case, and it says accepted the liberation, and that means that we get him back again as an enemy. That's no problem. We get 2 million, hopefully, for doing that. So what I like to do is wait until the enemies are maybe 2 on the ladder and get those with the boiling oil, and only if there's 1 on the ladder I might choose to use the rocks. And at this stage you can see the beleaguered British forces are being kept back by all of these attacks, so there won't get too many attacking our bases at this point. So let's quickly rush on, and everybody's happy now. Look at that, everybody's yellow. So we've now got 2 million banked. What are we going to do? Don't say that we're going to raise some more taxes as well. Execute hostages, execute French prisoners. Looks like we're going to execute a hostage, Joan of Luxembourg. Well, we could ransom her off, and that's definitely what I'd recommend doing with all of these guys. But Joan of Luxembourg has been a right pain to us throughout the entire campaign, and she captured Joan of Arc, so let's get royal justice on her. And there is blood and gore in this game, which is fantastic. So in December 1430, according to this game, Joan is imprisoned, our Joan of Arc is imprisoned by the English, and you'll be following Joan's story as we progress through this game. So we've got tons of money now, so what we're going to do, we're going to hopefully raise a campaign army. So let's create somebody, and hopefully let's choose a place to meet. Well, around here will do. And Angers is a place, it's French, so that's a good place to start. And this is hopefully going to be our demolishing army, and it depends which ones we've got. This is not too bad, but he's in the Tower of London, he's in the King's Court, but he's not very good. He's in the Tower of London, and he's the best thing that we've got. And so let's see now, that one's strong, he's in the royal prison, and so I'm not sure if he's an English guy. I don't think that we can get him to fight for us. Looks like he's Lahair, not quite sure, but definitely if they are in the King's Court, then that means they're fighting on our side, and the fleur-de-lis means the French. So having chosen our leader, then let's get some troops and some archers together. And at this point, if they cost maybe 200,000 a month, then that's not too bad. And cavalry, well, they're pretty good. If the attackers decide to attack us head on, we can leave some cavalry behind, and now we can displace the army and we can send those on an offensive. Let's choose the offensive, and now we've got a few more guys. Hopefully we can send those in, and let's see what a difference that makes. definitely capturing the town with the bridge situation is usually fun, but the drawbridge can work against us, and you can see that unfortunately, even though we raised a significant army, fortunately that's been killed, but luckily we don't have to pay them for the first month because they've been killed. So we've still got 2 million in the bank. That means we haven't lost much, and it means we can send in yet another campaign army without losing too much of our forces. So we haven't got any cavalry at the moment, we're simply sending force after force on the offensive. So let's send them in again, and let's prepare for a glorious battle. And so it's the winter time, and if the enemy is on a hill like this, then we can send in a rain of arrows, and we can send that rain of arrows in to weaken the enemy, and then we can move our soldiers forward, hopefully to take on those guys. And if anybody attacks us, hopefully we can actually lower and raise the guns as well. They have got a cavalry force in defence. Let's run forward as fast as we can, and also once they get in line we can also fire some arrows at those. So we've now got rid of the cavalry and they're now running away, so we can finish those off with the arrows, and that weakens the enemy. They're trying again, they're bringing it on, so let's weaken them again. There you go, and that's great. It means we've now, just like a Lemmings game, we've now used those arrows and we've managed to defeat the enemy. And the Count of Suffolk is now escaped. Unfortunately, it would be great if we could get the Count of Suffolk and ransom him off, and we'll need to capture English guys. And now they're trying again, so let's do the same thing. Let's soften them up before they get here. And they're raining arrows down on us. Unfortunately, we'll have to remember to move the soldiers forwards, and then the archers can still be effective in the battle lines at the back. And look at that, they've managed to get us again. So the enemy can get us. Fortunately, they've taken over our siege cannons, and so that's yet another battle over. So we've just won the battle and we lost the battle, but our commander has successfully escaped. And it does make a difference if we have weak leaders involved with all of this. It means that, unfortunately, it means our battle will generally not go very well, and if those are captured, then that's not too great. So you can see Joan is conducting, well, the bishop in France, who's allied with the English, is now interrogating Joan of Arc, along with an interrogator sent over from Britain. So the British are now interrogating her, and it won't be long before they found out that it was all a lie. And it wasn't all a lie. They put irons on her and raped her and did all kinds of things and forced her, unfortunately, to comply. So that's not a very nice part of history that we're talking about at the moment. So, unable to ransom anybody else, we're now tithing people to try to get us back up to that 2 million. And now, hopefully, we'll go back onto the offensive again. We can hopefully raise another army, as long as we have a significant amount in the bank, and as long as we have a leader willing to lead our army, we can then send those into battle. And so let's send those in. Of course, if we had 4 million at this point, it would be a lot easier, and that relies on capturing 2 of the British generals that are worth that amount of money. So if we can do that early in the game, that means that it's going to be pretty good. And if we hang around at the start of the game getting slaughtered by arrows like I'm doing at the moment, it's not very good. So by moving forwards like this, we can get in range of that cavalry, and that means it's battle over. So sometimes you have to take the battle to the enemy, and so we're battling the enemy now. We're not going to complete this game, and we're taking over whatever we can with whatever amount of troops that we can, and we're making as much headway as we can. And as long as we've got money in the bank, it means that we can continue. So, taking a look at the scores, Amiga User International awarded this 50% Commodore user gave this game 78%, Lemon Amiga is currently 79%, Info magazine gave this 80%, Amiga Computing awarded this 81%, and Ace gave this the highest score in May 1989 of 91%. All those average out to around about 8 out of 10. So this being 8 out of 10, I think the arcadey sequences are pretty good in general. I like the orc attack, sieging aspect and the drawbridge, the barbarian aspect of it. I don't like the battle scenario where you have to take on a knight in the field because I can't work that out, but the general battle scenario where we get troops and we get to fire cannons and archers and run into battle, that's usually very good, and that's my favourite part of the game, the actual battle scenario itself. So there are maybe 4, 5, 6 different scenarios that you can choose and some sub-games, so some of those are fun and some of those are less fun. And generally, if this map wasn't CGA, if it was in ham mode, then this game would be excellent to look at and would have excellent presentation, because you can see all of the rest of the images are in ham mode, which means we get some really good colours on offer. And the sprites, well, they've got 16 colours I think, and they're pretty good. It's one of the better games of this type. And if you remember, Defender of the Crown had a very rudimentary battle system. This one takes it over and takes it on to the next level. Carlo Piconti did work on many games up until recently in the business into the 2000s, and so the makers of this game did go on to bigger, huger things after this, and unfortunately Joan of Arc didn't go on to bigger and better and more things after this. She was burnt at the stake, so we're still waiting for that event in the game. That happened in May of 1431. Good news, Everall is apparently under our control. So that's fantastic. It means there's now more blue on the map than pink, and so we can see some areas are actually defecting at the moment. So if we capture enough territories, then some areas around there will actually defect. And as long as you keep everybody happy, we're down to our last million again in the bank. So what do? We've now got the coastal area. What do we do? Well, we're going to tithe that since we've just got it, and that gives us a bit more money. Not enough to keep the field army going for another month, but still something. So we're now in March 1431, so it won't be too long before we get towards the end of this game. Of course, it continues until you've captured all of the territories in all of the regions. So let's again try to get Le Mans, and sometimes if you capture all the regions around somewhere that's defecting, it will stop defecting and stop being a rebel, and that's one way to quell the rebellion, and that saves you executing loads of people. So there are a few redundancies in the game, and there are a few essential things that are buried deep in the menu, and looking for peace isn't really opportune, but you can do all kinds of other things in the game. And so ransoming people and beheading people and things like that, that's definitely taking it to the next level. And again, I'm not sure if you can have field armies, but the more you have, the more that will cost. And so early in the game it's pretty difficult when you don't have much money on offer to ration that cash, and if your field army gets demolished, then sometimes you can get the money back, and sometimes you're going to have to spend more money, and you have to wait until September until you get a huge amount of cash, unless you like me, you sail straight through December every single year without collecting a penny of it. So definitely the ransoming aspect is what you need to look out for. So it's a great feeling yet again once we get through that defence system and our soldiers are in red, and I'm not quite sure whether that's a fact because usually the British are in red, and the French I think are in blue. But anyway, we are now attacking somewhere else. So just a small matter of climbing up this ladder, and as soon as you see the guy's arms raising at the top, then that's the place to hold down the fire button, and as soon as you hear the clang of whatever it is hitting your shield, release the fire button, it can continue on to the top. So this is what I like to call the orc attack section. It's not that difficult, and it's fun to defend, and it's also fun to take. In this case it's a liberation, so hopefully we've liberated again Le Mans, and we've got the English out. And so have we quelled all the rebellion? No, we don't quell all the rebellions. So yet again we're in a tax loop, and so we have to tax people to survive unless we can capture one of the British soldiers and ransom them off. And it looks like we're displacing the army, and so we can drag those back to the castle at any point and put some more troops in there. So you have to decide what you're going to do, and it looks like we're being attacked again. This time we have the hill, and this time we can rain cannon fodder, cannonballs down on them, and you can only click one at a time, unfortunately, either the square button to fire the arrows or the square button to fire the cannon. And look at that, we can lower the cannon, we have to be careful not to hit our guys with that. And so running forward now with the soldiers, that finishes them off. So if the enemy have the upper hand and the upper hills, we can fire up towards them, and if we have the upper hills, we can fire down towards the enemy. Captain John Talbot is now in prison. That's fantastic news, because that writes our ticket now to the end of the game. So what are we actually choosing to do? We're clicking on diplomacy at the moment, and maybe if we gain peace with Britain we can get that. So what are we doing? We're clicking on Britain, we're clicking on liberation again, and we're clicking on the guy that we've just got, hopefully Captain John Talbot. He's got a British flag next to him, he's on our royal prison. So fantastic, we can try 4 million, and I'm not sure whether that will work, but we're going to try it anyway. So let's send off our best, and look at that, she's gone down to average. So these things can go up and down. If they win things, then they go up, if they lose things, they go down, and that applies to army leadership as well. If they're weak and they run away, then they get weaker, and if they're strong, they go down to good. So we don't have too many strong politicians in this case. Let's select the best we've got. That's £4 million going to that. And Regional of Chartres, whoever it said, are now going off to seek peace and hopefully get some more cash for us. And it's great that we don't have to wait another turn. Unfortunately, it looks like that's been declined. So now Joan of Arc is condemned to die and to burn at the stake. That means we get another digitised cutscene and a fantastic animation of that happening, and you can see the medieval buildings in the background held together. You can see the wood panelling on the outside and that kind of crisscrossy shape, and you can see a kind of a, maybe even a thatched roof as well, because they used thatch in those days. And you can see not too much built of bricks, but we've got brick foundations, and that was brick flags and things like that was taken on from the Romans. So that's the end of Joan of Arc, and that's the end of my play of this game. And you can see, unfortunately, the borders broke out at the bottom of it, but I don't think that's game over. I think you can continue, but that's the end of where we're going to get up to in this game. So the people inspired by Joan of Arc will have to reconquer their own land and kick out the British. So thank you for viewing this medieval banquet series, and I'll see you with another play guide sometime soon. Thank you.